Hey, it's IdkWhatsRc and this will be an update video. So as you can see, I'm now back to divination. So I've trained at the Abyss for quite a long time. I have 73 million experience in magic, that's quite a lot. And meanwhile, what I was doing is playing Path of Exile. So I've already made a little video about my low life freeze pulsar. So I was basically relying on life leech to stay alive, and I was freezing the enemies with my ability, so I had a lot of crit. And then after that I moved to the Nemesis League, so that's a hardcore league. So if you die, your character, it's not really deleted, but it's basically deleted, so you really need to stay alive. So I made a Marauder. So the ability I was using is by killing an enemy, it exploded and dealt damage to the other monster. It was a really efficient build, really more tanky. And then finally I made a summoner. So I had a lot of minions and I was using auras to boost the minion while also cursing enemies so my minion could deal more damage. And because I had a very low attack, the player itself, my character, not my minion were able to deal a lot of damage, but myself, I had a really crappy attack. I was using an ability that doesn't really rely on my attack. Long story short, what it did is that if it hits an enemy with 10% or less life, the enemy dies. So it was a very solid build, long story short. So playing Path of Exile was a very interesting experience. It was very fun, and it allowed me to take a step back and look at Runescape in a different point of view. And sometime in life, it's kind of important to do that, especially if you spend a lot of time on it. So one thing I really realized by playing Path of Exile is that Runescape isn't meant for combat at all. And Runescape shouldn't try to attract new players with its combat system. That's just silly. So there's a lot of different points I want to cover. First, RuneScape is all about camping. You camp a monster, you camp a boss. There is not really a surprise effect, special situation like in Path of Exile. So in Path of Exile, all the monster groups are randomly generated. So you can face a group of monster that reflect damage. So you need to maybe switch ability to do damage over time. Instead, maybe use a totem, so the damage will be reflected to the totem instead. And on top of that, they can also have an aura that makes them act faster. There can be two groups of monster. They can be a boss on top of that. So all the situations are always different. That's a very I would say a very interesting thing about Path of Exile. You always need to react differently depending on the situation, and you need to react quickly. There's a big adrenaline rush, especially in the Nemesis League. So if you die, you're gone forever. And I've never really felt that in RuneScape. And one of the things is that RuneScape is really slow-paced. So let's face it, it's really unresponsive. When you do combat, it updates every 2 frames per second, not faster, 2 frames per second, which is the game thing. Actually, it's even less, but let's just assume that it's 2 frames per second. I mean, that's just the slowest MMO that ever existed. Very, very slow for a combat system. And another thing is it's a grid game. You cannot move half a square. It works in square, so there's not really a precision that, for example, Path of Exile has, where you want to stay at a certain distance to the monster. In RuneScape, you can stand in a bunch of square, and you cannot really do quick movement to avoid an arrow or something like that, because RuneScape has a target system. So you click on the monster and you attack the monster. All your hits will hit the monster. You don't have to aim or anything like that. And you cannot dodge, obviously, because the monster also has a target system. Another thing is the lack of customization in RuneScape. It's kind of obvious. So there's, for example, armors, there's defense and damage. And with the evolution of combat, there's HP. So that's a big improvement. And for the weapons, there's attack speed, damage and accuracy. Wow, that's really amazing. If you take a look at the Path of Exile stats, you will find that it's quite a different story. I won't really cover that, but yeah, the customization system in Path of Exile is probably the best out there. And because there is no customization in RuneScape, there's only pretty much one way to play. Yes, there's melee, range, and magic that plays in a way differently, but all the melee character will play the same. Yes, there are different abilities, but it doesn't really change a lot compared to like Path of Exile. If I play as a summoner, it doesn't play at all like a marauder, like a freeze pulsar. And even the freeze pulsar, there are tons of different variants. So for example, I was playing with a low life with Leech. So if I wanted to play like a regular one, so not low life, I would need to rely maybe on life. I would need to use potions. I would need to really play differently, maybe rely more on armor and invasion and stuff like that. And while in low life, I had to change my gear, so I had a lot of energy shield. I also needed a lot of chaos resistance, otherwise I would be dead. Or I could buy a special unique item that makes me well, I won't really go in the detail, but there's a lot of different builds, viable builds, and they all play really differently. What I want to say is that in French we have an expression. I will try to translate it. Long story short, it says, you can try to polish shit, but in the end, it's still shit. And that's pretty much what Jagex has been doing with RuneScape. They try to improve the combat system. They did the evolution of combat. Most of the updates are aimed for combat. Add a new boss, add a new combat content. But at the end, that's not really going to, I wouldn't say change much, but it's not going to attract new players. Because new players, they will see RuneScape combat system, and then they will see, for example, Path of Exile combat system. I mean, it's a whole different universe. RuneScape will never be able to scale up to the complexity and, I would say, fun aspect of the combat system of a game like Path of Exile. And, I mean, like I said, it's a grid game with a target system that updates 2 frames per second. The server updates 2 frames per second. So you cannot scale up to other games. Well, all I've said, give me 2 seconds. So yeah, does this make RuneScape a bad game? Well, obviously not. RuneScape has other things that other games doesn't have that makes it stand out of the bunch. For example, in RuneScape, there's a community aspects. For example, right there are tons of people training at the same spot, and which Path of Exile doesn't have, but Path of Exile is not really an MMO, it's more like hack and slash. But I mean, there's a community of people, and another big aspect is the complex economic system. And it's complex because of the item synergy. So for example, I cut a log, I can use it to make an arrow. That's kind of crappy example, but I can mine ores, then turn it into board, turn it into armor, which is also a crappy example because the armor will simply be IDK, but I guess you guys get the point. So there's a synergy, so all the items, there's like the Grand Exchange, which kind of acts like the, I don't know what's the name, but anyway, there's price variation, and that's something that most game doesn't have. And one thing that's really make RuneScape special is the variety of gameplay. So there are tons of different skills, most of them plays differently. Obviously some are not that different than other, but there are still different stuff to do, and you can specialize in something. While in Path of Exile, yes, the combat system is amazing, but it only has combat system. So Path of Exile focused on the combat system, it really paid off, but it only has combat. While in RuneScape, it has tons of stuff, but the combat system cannot be compared to the other ones. So I guess that's pretty much what I had to say. Long story short, if Jagex wants to attract new players, they shouldn't try to focus on changing the combat, improving the combat, because that's not really something that will catch the eye of players that have seen combat system like Path of Exile. So yeah, see ya!